If you're a fan of physical basketball and the Iowa State Cyclones, you are in the exact right place at the exact right time. Today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day and making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Wherever you're watching or listening, be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we've got all things basketball. We are going to be talking about the men's team, the adjustments they've made, where they're sitting now, then the women and their big win over Kansas State. I called it. And finally, in the third segment, just kind of tournament season as a whole, maybe preview that BYU game that's coming up tonight as well. Before we get that far, obviously into the tournament season stuff, we need to take a look at this men's team right now as it currently stands. Iowa State 22-7, 12-6, the men, that is. Hold on to the top 10 streak in the AP poll. That's big. That is big. And I know what I said last week after the loss to Oklahoma State. I said, hey, maybe it's good that we drop that streak. Excuse me. So that way we can keep fire under us. We don't have as much at stake. We can just kind of play loose, play free. And I still feel that way. I'm not going to take back what I said, but I also do like having the top 10 streak stick around. I was kind of torn on, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It helps a lot. I don't think the actual number is what helps with recruitment as much as just being relevant at the top of the rankings. So holding on by a 9 or a 10 isn't the end of the world to me, at least, but it is still cool. Nonetheless, Iowa State holds on to that top 10 ranking, and really because of a dominant win over Arizona. And that's what we're talking about today. What has Iowa State done? What is Iowa State doing right now to be the best team that they've been all year? Well, for starters, it helps that they have everybody back in the lineup. Okay, Keyshawn Gilbert, Curtis Jones back from their either illness or muscle strains, and Milan Momcilovic back from his broken hand. Very good news. Hey, shout out to those guys and their rehab, and Curtis getting obviously better over that illness. That's good news. That's great news. That is stupendous news, as they say. I think they say that maybe in Sweden. I don't know. I'm not. I have no idea. But either way, the point being, full strength, good news, great news. Aside from that, the loss to Oklahoma State was a wake-up call. And as I said, previously, was it the first wake-up call? I don't know. But, I set multiple alarms, so maybe it takes multiple wake-up calls. I get it. Okay, trust me. Every minute from 7 to 8 or 6 to 7, depending on the day, is an alarm in my clock app. So I 100% understand. And it seems as though the Iowa State men's basketball team has taken this one to heart. Now, I'm not saying that this team wasn't physical, although I did point out it feels like they were certainly on a different level against Arizona. But up until this point, they certainly have kind of hung their hat on defense and physicality and rebounding and all of this, that, and the other thing. But there has been a very loud presence from TJ and from the players, not only because of just TJ banging his horn, but the reporters asking questions. So there was some media availability yesterday, and there was a lot of questions around, where is this team at physically? Are we pushing that boundary? And TJ said, hey, we are bringing out, the most physical, we are putting a real emphasis on that. And then Brandon Chatfield and Milan Momcilovic is where I turned my attention to, both, in the media room. And both were asked about why is the word defensive trying to come out of my mouth? The physicality. And both players said that they are better when they are more physical. And one point that TJ made going up to the head coach now, he said there's kind of this misconception of when you're more physical defensively, it gasses you out, doesn't give you the energy you need to be a great offensive player. You're too tired. However, I think it's the opposite. This is still what he's saying. He's saying, when you're more physical defensively, you kind of get that momentum going, that ball rolling, and that converts over, and you're more physical on the offensive side of the ball. And this isn't what he said in yesterday's availability, but he did. I've heard it. I guess I can't guarantee he said this, but basically the concept being the more physical you are, like you're going to get called, but you can't get called for everything. So you kind of, it's an advantage. And so Brandon Chatfield mentioned that when he's most physical, those are the best games he has. Milan Momcilovic feels the same way. He mentioned that he hasn't quite been the most physical player of all time growing up, but this Iowa State crew has kind of instilled that in him and made him a better player for it. Now, obviously, Brandon Chatfield, one of the main guys that's going to come up as far as he's had a significant play off the bench, I guess. I don't want to say he's not relevant, but it's certainly turned on recently. There was a stretch in the middle of the season here where we're seeing 2 points, maybe a goose egg, really from about Utah to, I would say, TCU is kind of that stretch there where he was getting some heat. He had a few games early, turned some heads. But then there was that stretch where it was like, what is going on here with Brandon Chatfield? And recently, in his last 8 games, is that 2, 4, 6 games? Double digits, obviously, against Arizona with 10 points, but 2 games with 9, a game with 8, and then a 4 and a 6. Obviously, the 4 being Oklahoma State there. I guess not obviously, but either way, we've certainly seen an uptick. And then if you can take that right from Oklahoma State to Arizona, that jump up is certainly noticeable. That is over a 100% increase, to use fancy terms there. And that's big. That's big. It's like what we talked about with Nate Heisey. If we can get some points off the bench, this team is just in an unbelievable spot. And then obviously Milan and what he brings to the table, that 7-game stretch where he wasn't in, we felt it. He's back. And if he can get heated, as far as like, well, I guess physically that, that works. But I mean more in the sense of like get hot, right? Can start playing his best ball. This is the best time for it, of course. I mean, it's the end of the year. You want to peak at the end of the year. The other thing they kind of talked about with Milan was his, when he sat, what happened there? Did you get better mentally? And he said, yeah, I mean, of course. Well, they kind of asked him the question to give him that answer, but he saw it and he took it. He said, you obviously want to be one of the best players out there, and everybody kind of looks towards Steph Curry. Then he said, well, I'm not like I'm not on the same level as Steph Curry, something along those lines. I was like, hey, don't sell yourself short, Milan. I mean, come on. You're a pivotal part of one of the greatest teams, not only in Iowa State history, but in the nation right now. Let's not get crazy. But he was basically like, the way he moves, how much he moves, that's something that I try to integrate into my game. And so the time away from the actual game gave me an opportunity to visualize that and see during the game, where would I be? What would I do? And I think as much as it kind of stunk to have him out, the way that he approached that time out is a great sign. And then, of course, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the final segment, but I'd like to throw it in there because we are talking about the media availability from yesterday. They were talking about senior night and how important these seniors are to the team. And now I'm thinking about it. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say right now, but I want to say it. I'm going to say it. Milan was talking about, these guys, big winners and some of the best teammates ever, and names off a few. And he kind of goes, and then you can hear what I believe, this is per me, Brandon Chatfield goes, Tamin. And Milan's like, nah, he's got another year. He's like, really? Yeah, no, he's got a year left. And to me, that is the leadership that this team right now is rolling. It is absolutely in its best spot best that it could be 1,000,000%. But I also think it's in one of its best spots yet. And it's almost in so good of a spot that players aren't even sure, like they're outperforming their grade, if that makes sense, grade, quote unquote. They're older than they actually are in the classroom. And so does that make a lot of sense to everything we just talked about? No, I understand that was kind of out of nowhere, but it stuck out to me and I wanted to convey it to you guys. I do think that this team is more gelled than ever, more physical than ever, and we're coming out ready to attack the rest of this season, to the end of the season, really. And that BYU game we'll talk about in the third segment, but for now, we are going to obviously jump over into the women's game. So stick around for that coming up right after this. Get the supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Iowa State basketball peak right now. It's undoubtedly the best that it has been. And one of the greatest reasons for that is revenge games. I mean, how could you, when you come out on top, you can't not love them. Okay. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Obviously, we talked about the men and their win over Arizona after the loss earlier this season. Now we're talking women and their win over Kansas State. I told you guys, this team is good enough. Remember back, Iowa State loses to number 11 ranked Kansas State, 87-79, but it was tied up at the end of regulation. Honestly, I thought Iowa State had a chance in that one. And that was kind of in a weird spot in the season, but either way, I was like, hey, don't count them out yet. I do think Iowa State is better than this showing, and maybe the cards just fell their way. I don't know exactly what happened, but I could tell you Iowa State, I'm going to say, dominated Kansas State in their most recent athletic bout, 85-63. And, it wasn't necessarily a runaway early. This isn't kind of like what happened with the men in Arizona kind of just holding a lead the entire game. At halftime, it was basically 34-37, basically. I think it was a little bit less. So I'm not super good at math here. So that's the number I'm going to go with, 34-37-ish. Close, my point. And it was really until about halfway till the third when Iowa State started to pull away a little bit, and then they kind of let them get back into it. But at the end of the day, it was the Cyclones' game to win, and they certainly took advantage. Now let's take a look at the box score here. Obviously, I'm sure by now you've seen huge night for Audie Crooks, but let's take a look at the entire thing. Audie Crooks, 36 points, your leading scorer for the Cyclones, goes 14 of 18 from the floor, 8 of 11 from the line. Then your next leading scorer, Emily Ryan, with 17. Big night for her, 6 of 10 from the floor, 1 of 2 from 3. And then you got Kelsey Jones with 10 points, Addie Brown with 9, Sydney Harris with 8. So pretty even rounding here. I mean, you had 3 with double digits as opposed to maybe 4 or 5, but you had 1 with 9 and 1 with 8. So basically a bucket away from another, 2 buckets, I guess, unless you split a 3-point up. Then you guess maybe you could do that. But from 5 players having double digits, that's a pretty big deal. So this was, that's an unbelievable game from the Cyclones, and specifically, of course, Audie Crooks. And it comes at one of the best times of the year. As far as Kansas State, what did they do in this? Your leading scorer, Poindexter, was 17. Sundell with 11. And honestly, I'm not even going to pull up the old game because I just don't really care. Iowa State didn't win that one, and they won this one. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Iowa State now 21-10, 12-6 in the conference. That did kind of hurt Kansas State. I am not going to lie. It's not a great look for them, but this is not a Kansas State podcast. Iowa State, I guess, finishes because this is the end of the regular season. 4 games back from the Big 12 champion in TCU, 12-6 to 16-2. And I honestly wondered if we could have beat TCU, but nonetheless, congratulations, I suppose. Still a lot of basketball left yet to play. So we'll talk about that in the third segment, of course. But finishing the year 12-6, 21-10 overall, this was the biggest win for the Cyclones, in my opinion. Now, everyone's going to have their own kind of thoughts about this. The loss to Baylor was kind of tough. I thought they could have had Kansas State first time in the year. First time they played them, they lose to TCU. They also lost to ranked West Virginia. They lost to Iowa, Connecticut, UConn, South Carolina. Every ranked game, they did not come out on top besides this one. So that's, at face value, like, duh, of course. You kidding me? Their biggest win. Yeah, like that was probably their biggest win. I think it was bigger for more reasons than just that. However, obviously a rematch, big game. It was, at home. That's going to help. That is going to help. So there's that. But also, the energy in that building was unbelievable. So can you blame them? I mean, it's not their fault. It's actually, well, it is kind of their fault, but fault is a bad word. It's like they're the reason that people show up for those games. Anyways, last game of the season, right? You come off the loss to Baylor and you go beat UCF. And then you've got an opportunity against Kansas State. Let's end the year on a win streak, not a loss streak. Let's get some momentum going. Huge win. I mean, 22 points is unbelievable, especially when you consider where they're at about halfway through the third, roughly. So to come away with such a big win in that regard was a big deal. Other points of emphasis here. They won the rebounding pretty handedly, 47-31. That's a great sign. Assists, you're going to see a 22-30 ratio. So nothing to, I mean, what is that? Like 60, it's probably close to 70%. I don't know, 22 of 30, roughly. That's a pretty solid ratio. That's not bad. I think that's right. Right? It's roughly 2 over 3. It was pretty solid. Only 8 buckets not assisted. So it's nothing crazy, but that's a good number. You shoot 53% from the floor, 41% from the line. Those are respectable numbers. And the confidence that this team has, obviously, that was senior night. This is a great spot to be in going into the final, I mean, this was their last regular season game. We're talking about BYU coming up for the men, and it's the last game at home, but it's not the last game, right? This is not the last game of the season for your Iowa State men's team. However, for your women, that was the last game of the regular season. That's it. So shout out to them for getting that one done. But that's how that goes, right? That's they left it all out there, and I think when you leave it all out there like that, and that's how it goes. That's a huge deal. That's a big, big deal. So shout out to the women. Congratulations on the way that the season went. Maybe it didn't go to standard. Maybe it did. I don't know exactly what they're thinking internally, but you can't feel bad about that win. And we're going to talk more about what's coming up for them, really coming up right after this. Iowa State basketball is at the peak, as we've said. And you know what that means. If Iowa State basketball is peaking, probably the end of the year. That's everybody says that, I'm pretty sure. It's tournament season, baby. We got to roll. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I just talked about the women, so let's just start there, and we'll go from there. Big 12 basketball tournament time for the women in Kansas City. Big deal. Obviously, of course, I mean, it's a tournament. Who doesn't love a tournament? And so you're probably wondering, where do the Cyclones sit right now? 7 seed is what I am seeing per the Big 12 Conference Instagram page here. And they will play the winner of Arizona State and Cincinnati. So that is awesome, if you ask me. Let's take a look at this season. How did that go for the Cyclones? Win over Arizona State. I remember that on the Arizona trip. You beat Cincinnati as well. Is it tough to beat the same team twice? Maybe. but you've shown you can beat them once. So, I mean, and then after that, really, I'm not going to get too far into who they would face because it's Baylor. And so that's the way down the line. It will, I mean, they'll probably be there. Let's not mince words, but it will be Baylor because of the way that it works. So they only got one bye. They can get 2 byes, but I mean, that's a great spot. Nonetheless, at least they're not playing that extra game. So played well enough this season to end up with 1 bye, just great. And you're playing, it's not a second bye, but it's like a warm-up game, the way I'm seeing it. This is either way, you're playing somebody that you have played and did well against. And then you get to go into Baylor, who obviously a good team, great team, even potentially, but a team that you didn't see that long ago. And you can always learn from that film. So honestly, this great draw, in my opinion. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. That's fine. In my opinion, great draw for the ladies here. Who knows? Maybe they bring home Big 12 title. Surprise some people. They got hot at the right time. Big win over Kansas State. As I said, I thought they could have done that the first time. Thankfully, they backed my words up and got it done this time. But either way, that draw is great. Now, why am I talking about the BYU game under the tournament season portion of this show as opposed to kind of that first segment that was dedicated to men, the media availability and whatnot? Mostly because this game is a huge deal for seeding in the Big 12 tournament. As it stands right now, BYU, Iowa State, both 12-6 in the conference. Overall, doesn't really matter. But 22-7, 21-8, very similar resumes as it currently stands. Now, that is for kind of that 4th or 5th. They're sitting right now at 4-5. Now, granted, there is another game after this, but BYU will have Utah, and Utah hasn't exactly shocked the world multiple times. So I have to assume that that's how that's going to go. And then the Iowa State Cyclones, their final game of the season will be on the road, but at Kansas State. So who knows? Potentially this game doesn't necessarily indicate it's not like 100%, but it's going to have major implications. And so, well, let's just talk about it. The BYU Cougars, as I mentioned, currently 12-6 in the conference, 21-8 overall. Sorry, I want to make sure I got that right. To Iowa State's 22-7, undefeated in their last 5. Now, this is a conversation we've had of, Drake and I did specifically. Is this the hottest team in the Big 12? Is this the hottest team in basketball? Well, I think that actually the question was best. And I said no, but I do think they are arguably one of the hottest teams. Big win over West Virginia, 21 points, 10-point win over Arizona State. Not buzzer beater, but a single point win over Arizona. They just absolutely handed to Kansas. Those are their last 4. And then they beat Kansas State by 15 in their 5th most recent game. 6 wins in a row. And we were just talking about revenge games. They lost to Arizona by 11. And then they come back and beat them. This team is hot. There's no other really great way to put it. Thankfully, they are coming into Hilton. That is a great sign. Excuse me. But let's take a look at some of the guys on their team, and then we'll kind of talk about what I think could happen and where, basically what could happen. So Richie Saunders. I apologize if I'm butchering. I'm going to say Saunders because the U. Richie Saunders, 15.8 points a game. Their leader there. Also the leader in steals at 1.2 per game. Kebi Kaida is their leading rebounder with 7.5. And then he also leads the team in blocks at just under 1 block per game. You got to look out for Egor Demin at 5.7 assists. I hope it's not Egor. I'm sorry, Egor, if that's the case. Not a personal shot. It's just like the history of that name isn't great. But either way, it's 10.7 points for him, and he also leads the team in assists. So this team is dangerous. I mean, there is no denying it. It's literally that basic. I don't know what to tell you. This is going to be a tough one. If you remember last year, this game was iconic in Hilton last year as well. I actually they're very thankful to get to have the opportunity to have gotten to go to that game. That was a really, really cool environment. And I expect nothing less. Have seen, hopefully you've seen it as well. If you are going, this game is a stripe out, so be attentive, pay attention to that. The crowd is going to be unbelievable in this one. The team is fired up. The team is ready to be more physical than ever. And it's a senior night. Guys are going to be playing for each other. We'll see where Keyshawn is at. But Milan and Brand Chatfield in media were very much like, look, we're ready to just come out, play the best ball we can, be very physical, and dominate. And, this team holds on to that top 10. Maybe that's inside the room, a bit of a momentum saver, potentially. Play both sides of the hand there, I guess. I don't know. I don't love that argument. But at least there's no loss in confidence because they're now outside the top 10 is kind of how I'm going to approach that. But I honestly think these guys had the blinders on. I think that they are 100% locked in, ready to roll, take on BYU. Doing it at home is going to be, I'm so thankful for that. I mean, I really am. But tonight at 8 p.m., I think it's 7, I want to say. ESPN's showing me 8, but somebody in the comments can't comment that because I'm not going to be able to look it up right now. But ESPN showed me, I feel like ESPN shows me Eastern time. Nonetheless, this is an awesome game. This is a big-time game. This is a huge game for Iowa State to get back-to-back wins. This is kind of what could feel like, I would say, I guess maybe a Sweet 16 Elite 8 type of deal, potentially, with you face Arizona, then you face BYU in a quick-ish turnaround here, Saturday to Tuesday. Good, obviously both games at home, so that's not super translative, but definitely a very good opportunity for this team to come out firing on all cylinders in 2 games, which you have to bring your A game. And BYU is going to force Iowa State to do that, and I actually love it. I love that this team is posed with this opportunity, or poised at this point in the season. Make the most of it, rock and roll, and let's just see what happens. I can't wait. Until next time, Cyclone fans. Sayonara.